Okay, hello and welcome to the Tuesday, November 9th meeting of the Finance Committee pursuant to the Governor's June 16th, 2021 Act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20. The Finance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. At this time, I will take a roll call of attendance. Mr. Whitaker.
Present.
Mr. Alfred.
Here.
Ms. Zemer.
Here.
Mr. Robinson.
Here.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
And I am, of course, here. We are now officially called to order. Okay, first up on the agenda is the minutes. All of you, as I said, we don't really have anything yet to discuss, but all of you should have received the email I sent last week with all the outstanding minutes. Get your corrections to Lisa as you do it. I would, as I said, I prefer if everybody could try to get to that. If they haven't gotten to it already, try to get to it sometime this week, only because it would be nice to catch up, before we get seriously going with the budget process. Yes, Mr. Whitaker.
I thought we had already done the February, January, that time frame stuff, but I could be wrong. But I'll double check.
I'll double check because I just passed along what she gave to me.
Okay.
But there was a list that we had that I thought was complete, but I'll double check just to make sure.
For some reason, I thought we were caught up to town meeting time frame last year.
Well, just remember that we were getting caught up, right? We had this time period where we were behind, then we got caught up on the behind ones and we're current for a little while. Then we lost our recording secretary and then we fell behind again. Then we got Lisa, so there may be a gap in there.
Yeah.
And the one thing I will say is she's in the town clerk's office, so she knows exactly what's missing. So in that sense, things that haven't been approved, she knows, right? So that and she did send me a list at one point and I looked through it and I didn't see minutes for some of these, so I'll just double check. But there were a couple she did send me or not minutes, but she sent me a list of dates and some of those dates were dates we didn't have meetings. So I thought that I had corrected everything, but I'll double check just to make sure. But in any case, just try to get your corrections to her. Yeah.
And now this is a substitute for the minutes, which we are required to do, but I do feel comfort in the fact that the recordings are all up online. So if anyone did want to, peruse our meetings.
Yes, and I'll avoid going on my usual rant about this, but I think that we should definitely get into, the state as an entity should get into the 21st century and stop requiring minutes. Because as long as you have a recording of the meeting, right? If you have every word that was said recorded for all posterity, what do you need to bother paying to have somebody write up a summary?
I'd like a transcript. Actually, it would be easier so you don't have to actually watch the meeting. But yeah.
Yeah. But the whole point is that if there's something you really want to know about what transpired at the meeting, now that they're all recorded,
right?
That seems like a much more effective means of communicating the meeting than having to make a request or going on the website and downloading a summary of the meeting that is obviously less descriptive than the entire recording. So anyway, okay, but that's it on the administrative front. I haven't seen anything paperwork wise that we need to deal with, so we can move right on to item number 2 on the agenda, which is the update from our illustrious town administrator. Go, Travis.
Illustrious like my hair.
That's luminous.
Some of voluminous. That's a good word. A couple things are coming under elsewhere on the agenda. So I think the 3 I just want to hit on are scheduling. And some of them, I would send to the liaisons, but since we had this timeline, DLS tab, I sent that report to everybody. I've got feedback essentially from everybody who was involved. But I'm going to ask DLS to essentially present their methodology, their process, and their findings on Monday night. I'm sure there will be questions, but I think really at the end of the day, there's a report we can all take from that and have discussions. But I think first off, just having them go through what their process was. Obviously, you can see at the end of that document. I'll put it up online as well ahead of Monday. Who they interviewed and all those types of things. So that's why I sent it to at the moment. But we'll put it up online and we'll have them deliver it, and then we can all discuss it at a later date. I don't think we need to get into it immediately. The other one to schedule, so that will be the 15th. They're going to deliver that essential, explanation of their process. And then we'll just have the document available online and we'll all discuss it. After that, the tax rate hearing. Right now I have scheduled for November 22nd. The Board of Assessors has multiple meetings scheduled right now. If they're unable to hit that date, the last date we would rain check it to November 29th. So either the 22nd or the 29th on the FY22 tax rate hearing. And then the last one I just confirmed, the two Stantec reports, both were sort of in draft format when they were presented. The sidewalk one, the request from the select board was to add an appendix that would take essentially the methodology that they have in terms of determining which projects are most important, and then lay them out for the town to at least consider to be a priority order. So the document that the Stantec engineering group on sidewalks presented was, this is how we view all of these things. Here's general numbers that you could apply to a sidewalk project for X, Y, and Z, for ADA ramps, all those types of things. The select board, when that was presented to them, asked for an appendix that would be, all right, use that methodology and then give us what you would recommend. The town will take from that and potentially, disagree with that, but that's what we would like. So they are prepared to get that back to us. And then the water report essentially was in draft, but they had done that priority list, which is what the project that we put on the fall town meeting. And so they just really honestly need to also finalize the report as a final deliverable to the town under their contract, and then hand over the ArcGIS, which I thought was probably one of the more compelling parts of their presentation, which actually outlines the sidewalk from Stantec, the sidewalk from the Complete Streets, which is the Mass DOT grant program, and then also their work on the water. So to get that all together, which I think we're all interested in, is kind of tying them together and then taking essentially that information and moving forward with it. I'm going to schedule for December 6th. So that'll be really the next 3 to 4 weeks, has quite a bit of hard hitting things. So DLS tab, I'll just have them essentially give the methodology on the 15th. Tax rate hearing will be on the 22nd or the 29th, hopefully the 22nd. And then the Stantec reports will both be finalized and with final presentation on December 6th. So that's it I have under TA. The rest would fall under other items on the agenda.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Unless there's questions on that, I do have one other thing under TA update.
Here you go. That sounds my phone.
Okay. Any questions on those?
I'm working on it. Just give me a second. Go ahead. My freaking brother. Okay. So any questions for Travis on what he's said so far? Okay, then we can go on to the next thing. You have anything else you want to do?
So under TA update, I don't see it elsewhere on the agenda.
Okay.
So just on the financial policies, I had sent out to the select board and the finance committee, I think 2 weeks ago at this point, a sort of updated version based on the conversation of the finance committee and the select board. I'm looking for direction from either. I think I was asked by the select board what the timeline is. To me, this version essentially is, there isn't a final answer on OPEB. So it's a middle ground, and everything else I think is pretty much lines up, right? And so to me, the timeline is, we might as well move on this because it's essentially in between both parties' decision or ideas on OPEB. But really the timeline answer to the select board question was, before, finance staff, myself sit with S&P in the spring, they referenced in their upgrade of us to AAA that the next time they sat with us, they expected the financial policies to be updated. So we could certainly let it slip, but I don't know that I see the value in that. Not to oversimplify, but essentially what we did in the revision after the last meeting was to say the first 250 into the pension stabilization fund came from free cash. So in FY23, the 1.5 million, which the finance staff recommendation was to set aside 1.5 minimum for OPEB and pension. Since 250 came from free cash, that in FY23, 1.5 million is going to go to OPEB. And then in FY24, we'll have further information on the next free cash certification, any new information from the actuary, and then, the town will make a decision in FY24. So it is kicking the can to a certain extent, but based on that conversation, I didn't see, a way to word it otherwise. I think it works. And so that's where I am with the financial policies. Happy to move ahead with that, but also need some feedback if there is any.
Does anybody read the policies besides we look at the revised things? Okay, good, Mr. Alfred.
So, look, I get that this is sort of a labor of thread the needle and trying to sort of get something that everyone can agree on, and I think we're basically there. In my opinion, there is just and I really do hate to do this. I really just wanted to sort of be done with this, but there is just one change that for me gets me there, but without it sort of is sort of not what I'd be willing to support, and that's on page 6 in the highlighted section. After the, in parentheses, section X towards the bottom, which is the intention of the town, should the OPEB actuary study call for, I would just like to delete everything after that.
Would be what?
Would be to just delete everything after that.
The last 2 sentences of that paragraph.
And after, and it's sort of stated already that, for fiscal year 24, the OPEB Trust Committee, Select Board, and Finance Committee will take any new information from the town's actuary and free cash flow certification from the Commonwealth and determine the appropriate use. That's already sort of kind of already there. I just, my issue with that is it strongly implies that almost whatever the ADC is, that we sort of need to accept that, and the Finance Committee doesn't have any sort of control over the inputs for the ADC or that's the OPEB Trust Committee. And what I don't want to do, and this is just, I don't want to put something into a policy that makes it a violation of the sort of the policy, if you will, if we wanted to recommend something different than what the OPEB Trust Committee decided to sort of use for their actuarial report.
Well, I mean, just to echo, I mean, I've given some of this feedback to Travis already, just to echo some of my sentiment on that. The idea that we act as though the ADC is not going to come, is going to come in at less than 1.5. I mean, it implies that there's some uncertainty about what is being stated there when there is none. We know with 100% certainty the ADC will come back at less than 1.5 because of the methodology that's used to calculate it. So I don't like the idea of saying, well, we'll look at what the ADC says and decide, if it says that's implying that we're signing up to, okay, well, when it comes back and says less than 1.5, which we know it will, right, that we should automatically adopt it. And, I kind of concur that I'd like to see those last 2 sentences removed. The policy itself is, I think, without those 2 sentences is exactly what we want, which says basically minimum 1.5 million. And the 3 groups will determine the right allocation based on free cash and the minimum 1.5 plus whatever we have free cash.
I'll be honest with you, everything else in there is specifically to address the feedback between the Finance Committee and the Select Board. So I'm perfectly comfortable with leaving it to a minimum of 1.5 million for both liabilities to be in the next 2 fiscal years. I think that was the original intention of the finance staff in the presentation to both committee and board. So my only statement is, I think the Select Board, the recommendation from the Finance Committee, I think the Select Board is correct in what they said, which is we're just not comfortable committing to saying, yes, we will do 250 per year from free cash to pension stabilization. Therefore, that leaves 1.5. If you take out those sentences, you're back to, I think, what the original recommendation from finance staff was, but I'm comfortable with that.
Well,
and I
the
think that you're right.
The original recommendation had a 2037 funding schedule. There was some more stuff in it than that.
Right,
So,
and not only that, but it also talked about the combination being 1.5, right? It didn't say minimum 1.5.
You're right.
So
no, I think removing the language specific to 23 and 24 is fine, but I think what the concern that the Select Board had in terms of the 250 specifically saying it was coming from free cash, I think is valid too. And if we had a very solid number, which we all discussed the reasons for, which were outlier sort of reasons for why free cash was high this year. If it's not high next year, which we've already discussed why we know it's going to be lower, that they weren't comfortable with the 250. I agree that, right. So the original recommendation from staff was to say 1.25 to OPEB and 250 to pension. This is to say a minimum of 1.5 for both, and we will be determining that based on a number of factors. I think that's cleaner. I like that. I was doing this specifically to address the concerns that I heard from both sides. So
Yes.
is that, so it's essentially just simpler, and we'll address it in the budget cycle.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of basically just kind of, I mean, it resolves sort of nothing of our differences and opinions on what we want to do, but at the same time, it leaves us in a position where neither side necessarily would be requesting a violation of the financial policies to do what they want to do.
Yeah, no,
But
Yeah.
still commits us to putting 1.5 million and minimum aside from the operating budget.
Right. Which was always the recommendation at every level, and everybody.
No one disagreed with that, yeah, but we have that in there.
So other thoughts from the committee? I mean,
No, I think that makes sense. My opinion. This is Vincent, just to put myself on the record. So yeah, I think it's the best of, nobody's happy, but it's the best and the best way to cut the baby, as they say.
to remove those.
I don't
last
think
two
that's the
sentences.
same. I don't think that's.
I'm sure it's not. I'm sorry, top
I
of my
know.
head. I'm trying to think of what it is. It's late.
So to give Travis, so do we think that we have a majority opinion that we would be okay with removing
if
that,
you want to
ending it
tweak
after
it,
that parentheses
then-
section X
Then
piece?
the final one, and then we'll vote on it next week.
No, I
or-
think it's better to move. I would move along now. I can just make the
Okay.
motion with the exact sentences to be removed, to be read into the record if you want.
I
Can we
mean,
get a clean version and just vote on the?
I was
clean
just gonna say,
version?
we'll vote on the final version, Dan. I think that what I'm trying to say is, if we remove those last two sentences, if Travis removes those last two sentences and presents us with that, are we, again, do we have a majority opinion that that would be acceptable to us? And then he can remove them, create the final draft, send it to us, and we can,
Yes, personally, yes.
The only thing I'd say is, I mean, and the select board is waiting for us to act. I don't want this to drag on. So if the select board is waiting for us to act and we don't act until next week, right before this is not going to be done until after Thanksgiving, and we're going to be into budgeting. So that's
okay, so I get your point. We have our select board representative here. So Ben, hearing what you're hearing today, that we're okay with taking those last two sentences out, would the select board be willing to, if Travis took them out, gave you guys a final copy on Monday, would that be okay with you? Or do you still want us to vote first?
I personally, I think it would be, if all you want to do is delete the two sentences and everybody else with everything else is okay, I don't see why you can't do a vote. That's my personal opinion. I think we'd prefer a vote, because otherwise I think until we get a vote, I don't think the select board's going to take it up. That's my opinion. I don't have any fact on that. I haven't asked. I don't know that for a fact, but I would venture to say that that's the case.
I agree.
We'll let the select board win this power play, and we can go
Hold
for
on.
it.
Michelle, what are you gonna say?
Just under plan, it says the second line, the town will continue to contribute a minimum of 1.5 million, but then in the chart, it says set aside 1.5 million annually. It doesn't say minimum.
Oh, in
Yeah,
the chart.
the chart is, I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm really trying to keep it to one page. I think I can work in min dot without going on another line and probably get it in there.
Okay.
Well, just get rid of the word specifically and put minimum instead. A minimum of, to
What is the
address the
document
liabilities. You don't need to put specifically. It is already OPEB and pension specific.
Yeah, I think too, this is literally a summary document for the people who don't want to get in the weeds. And I think, we could vote the document without that. And I haven't even honestly had Sharon and Mary look at the summary. I tried to make it all fit onto one page. So I think if you're comfortable with the document itself, the summary page can be updated and corrected.
Yeah. Okay. So if everybody's good.
Are we looking
then-
at the document from Travis's October 28th email? Like, I'm trying to find what. you're
The
looking at.
title of the document should be Finance Policies Final Draft, Staff plus FinCom plus SB Feedback 10/28/21.
Hey,
Where is
I
it?
hand wrote November 1 on it. So I don't know if that's
That
when
might
I
be one.
posted it or if that was the email.
Well,
Is it in an email? Is it on the town?
yes, it's an email.
I sent it
I
on
was gonna
October
say-
28th.
October 28th at 2:04 PM.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I
October
was
28th,
asking.
2:04
It's the
PM.
October 28th email.
Yep.
Financial policies updated version. Correct?
Yes. Should be the only attachment in that email.
Yep. So the last two sent on page 6.
Page 6, last two
Last
sentences.
two
So after it
sentences.
says section X, right? That the sentence is after that.
The intention of the town should OPEB actuarial, blah, blah, blah. And then the next sentence is, the town will also consider available free cash for such use as appropriate. Those
Yeah.
two sentences are going to be stricken.
Yes.
Thank you.
So do we want a motion?
If everybody's good with that, and then we will take, then yes, I'll entertain a motion to
So,
approve the revised financial policies.
so I'm gonna,
With the amendment that, the last two sentences, Travis knows the edits, but.
but I'm gonna read, I'm gonna read them. So
Okay.
that we approve the financial policy statement as presented in the 10/28 email with the following amendment or strike on page 6. We remove after the word section X, the words, the intention of the town should the OPEB actuarial study call for reduction in the ADC would be to keep the 1.5 million per year funding schedule in place and redirect funding capacity to the new pension stabilization fund. The town will also consider available free cash for such use as appropriate.
A
Do I have a
second.
Second. Okay. Any further discussion on that motion? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed to a vote. Mr. Whitaker,
Yes,
Mr. Alfred,
Yes.
Ms. Zimmer,
Yes,
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, so there you have your vote, Ben, even though he's not there to hear it. So there he is. Okay. Okay, so anything else we can then move on? I guess now you are finished with your update, right, Travis?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go on to the next item, which is the budget parameters. Travis, I know, has been looking at some of the frameworks for the budgeting. So Travis, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so I mean, we just we have everything FY21 updated, so that's been sent out to Select Board, Finance Committee, interested parties as requested for the FY21 update. So I just plugged that in to the actuals. Really, the only thing that we're looking at this stage is a very preliminary look at state aid. And so looking at the compound annual growth rate of state aid is one way to look at it. Obviously, we're going to be reading the tea leaves and relying on Rep. Dykema, Senator Spilka for any new information. I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of money that has come into the state. They have renewed their rainy day, so there is certainly an expectation that there's going to be significant progress on the pre-COVID type plan for state aid, but I haven't seen it on paper yet, and so I'm factoring in 2.5% for state aid at the moment. I'm not going to show the tax levy. I'm just going to show essentially the local receipts. And quite honestly, I mean, I don't want to minimize it, but local receipts for the town of Holliston it's just not, it's not a heavy lift. We're looking at historical data. We do need to be conservative because if we don't hit a number, it's going to come back to bite us. And so I'm just going to pull up, generally speaking, where we are on that revenue number, and then I think the finance committee generally likes to plug it into your own model. I generally stick to, and I will zoom in. I know this is small, but I just want to show the full scope here. So there's recaps here. So this is the way that the tax rate is set, and then over here is actuals, and it's really only here as compared to the local receipts because generally speaking, what DLS, the Division of Local Services, is going to look at for local receipts is going to be If you're trying to go too low compared to your 3 and 5 year averages on your local receipt categories, they're gonna, ask you to bump it up. If you try to be too aggressive to try to meet a number, which some communities have to do, Holliston does not, but if some communities try to do that, DLS will sort of make you prove out why you would go above your 3 or 5 year averages. And so, as I said, the tax levy information has been removed. We'll have final numbers on 22 once the tax rate hearing happens, either on November 22nd or the 29th. As of right now, this is the number that went into the FY22 recap, and the MSBA money is going away here, but that is not a bad thing. It's because of the debt service that it's offsetting is going away as well. So overall, the picture on debt service is positive. This just happens to look like we're losing revenue. In reality, it's not that impact. The 263 would be the impact. And again, so what I put here is the compound annual growth rate between FY 18 and 21 was 3.41. This is an assumption of 2.5% until essentially we get more information from the state. So as I said, it's really the local receipts that we'd really have a conversation on. Let me just scroll down really quickly. So the other thing is, anytime you're assuming an increase on the cherry sheet revenue side, which is the state aid, you also need to take into consideration the cherry sheet offsets and charges, which I just essentially used the exact same percentage on. And that would be it. If we had a $260,000 increase on state aid at 2.5%, we'd also have to offset about $35,000. Although that is really going to actually impact, it'll actually be played out on the cherry sheet itself, which we can go through when we have more information or a preliminary. So just to look really quickly at the local receipts, and then I think, as I said, it's not too much of a heavy lift. So motor vehicle excise is our largest category. Just very high level. What I would say here is, we can bump it up, but we need to be careful for a variety of reasons. One, we see a lot more leasing going on, which based on the way that the motor vehicle excise tax is calculated, it's very good because you end up with cars in the first 3 years of their useful life, which is it's based on the original MSRP with a sliding scale. So the more new cars you have on the road, the higher the motor vehicle excise tax. At the same point, right now, what we're seeing is people who want new cars and can't get them because of a chip shortage. And so we actually do have some cars that are, even though there's an interest in newer cars, they're not being able to meet the need. And so, I think we want to recognize that our motor vehicle excise tax revenue has been going up, but we are a little bit concerned that we're not going to be able to just continue to grow. So let me zoom out a little bit here. Like I said, the actuals are over here. The 5 year average is about 2.4 million. My number will be 2.2, which is, again, growing it, but growing it, with a little bit of caution. Penalties and interest is slightly reduced because of the lowest year, which is FY20. That's generally how I treat the 3 to 5 year averages, even if the 3 to 5 year average is higher. To protect the town, generally speaking, we would look at the low unless we know that it was not a valid reason. I see a hand up, so I'm just going to stop right there.
Okay, go Dan. You're on mute, Dan.
Sorry, Travis, I didn't. So I was just trying to. So our motor vehicle excise tax for this year is expected to be an increase of 25,000 over last year.
75. So the recap, when we set the tax rate. Oh, I'm sorry. You're looking at FY22 currently. Yeah. Yes, it was a $25,000 increase in the model for FY22.
I'm talking about actuals.
Well, we're in FY22, so you don't have the actuals yet, and that's going to be in March.
The FY21.
Oh, I see.
FY21 was a record for motor vehicle excise, right? And so we do see a lot of new cars, and right now the only reason to not get too aggressive on increasing it to the average, to say, the 5 year average over here is just under 2.5, is to say that.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I see the actuals over to the right. I apologize. That's my bad. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. We need to be very careful. I mean, I'm starting to see people who are talking about this supply chain issue, not just the chips, but everything. Working out, going out 18 months to 2 years to get done, and as soon as we have chips, it'll be a steel try. There'll be something else that'll cause it. So I do want to be careful with that. But it seems like you're being fairly prudent. So anyway, okay, great. Now I see it now. My bad. Yeah,
and I mean, I can sort of couple in actuals next to tax rate recap, but it gets very convoluted when you do that. So I try to keep them separate. I mean, this is essentially in the middle here is essentially how we're setting the tax rate. And over here is how we're sort of comping our numbers. So penalties and interest, like I said, is really based on the low year and the 5-year actuals. The pilot is going up based on, this is essentially our HUD housing agreements. And so it's going up based on sort of where the agreements actually are. The solid waste fees, we did see a spike just as we did in cost during COVID. But, I don't think we want to sort of ride that wave and consider them to be essentially historic. I see another hand, so I'm going to stop.
Yes, other charges for services. I'm jumping. Sorry, I was gonna look at it. What is it? Because I just see the huge increase versus what you're budgeting.
So the other charges, let me just check. I have to drill into that category. I don't have
Okay.
detail in front of me. Let me pull that up when we get to the end here. Because there
Sorry.
is one that I specifically need to pull specifics out, which we'll go through, and that is not it. So let me pull into the detail on that in a second. So I have that steady, and the reason I have the 145 is based again on the low numbers and not taking into account the FY21 actuals, but let me pull that up in a sec. On fees, we're going up to, again, the lowest, which was FY21 actually, and this is the one where FY20, I believe Sharon updated the finance committee and the select board. The reason for the spike in the middle there was a grant that came in where she didn't have anywhere to put it. That was sort of a reimbursement to the town on the original barrels, which was, when the Harvey contract got signed, there was a grant that the town received, but it was sort of after the fact. So the town ponied up and then essentially took in the revenue. But now that is off the books, that category went down to 170. And so I'm just slightly less on the protective side for the town. The rentals is related to Pinecrest. That's a specific agreement that gets paid out of the Pinecrest revolving fund to support the general fund. Everything else, all the revenue generated from New England Golf on the golf side and from Anthony's on the Green on the restaurant side go into the revolving fund. Revolving fund cuts $60,000 to the town. So that stays the same. Revenue on ambulance, we had a good year. We bounced back. But at the same point, I just moved ahead on a contract with MRI to do the fire and ambulance evaluation for the town. So at this point, I think there's potential changes ahead, potential to not have changes ahead, but it's still a category that we've put some serious thought into and made sure that the collection is working well. We've seen the benefit of that in the actuals, but I don't think we want to get too aggressive on this one. Licenses and permits. This is the one where we see the biggest jump specific to COVID, which was the building department. And, I think I would say based on the number of permits running through the building department, I do not see a drop in FY23 coming. I think it's probably going to be 24 and beyond. But at the same point, this 405 again is based on the same methodology, which is to take the low year and the 5-year average, which was 405. And it also, it bumps up the category significantly over what we've been assuming, but it does not get overly aggressive based on 1 or 2 years, which we've seen, again, a huge influx due to COVID, the number of permits coming through the building department. Now, I think one of the questions I get a lot is when it comes to building permits versus new growth, what is, the connection? There certainly is a connection. When you are pulling building permits that are for additions on a house or to tear down and rebuild, you're going to get new growth. But on smaller projects, if somebody's pulling a building permit on, we can generate revenue in a building permit that does not get captured in new growth. And so there is a connection, but it is not a direct correlation. So the other thing I would say, I don't have new growth finalized. It's going to be above the 325 that we've assumed in the past few years, but it is not going to be as aggressive or as high as it was, in FY21. So I don't have the number to share with you. Again, on the 22nd and the 29th, we'll be able to sort of see the final new growth number. But I would also say, looking ahead to 23, I don't see a justification for significantly increasing above our normal 325 area for new growth. The last ones are all relatively small. So fines and forfeits, again, it's a little bit hit or miss. And so I would sort of go off of the average. The investment income is something that we're all tackling as cities and towns. Mary is trying to be as aggressive as possible. This is specifically the general fund investment income. And so, the investment income of obviously the OPEB trust sits with the OPEB trust, the general stabilization sits with the general stabilization. This is all of the general funds accounts, which we are limited in what the state allows us to do and invest in. And the things that we can be the most aggressive on are things that, are generally speaking, vehicles that the normal investor doesn't even use anymore. So, I mean, we're hoping for additional freedom from the state on some of those things, but, essentially we're doing the best that we can. And that number has, is slightly disappointing. Medicaid reimbursement, is probably more of a school function. And so some of this data, again, is all based on a lot of things that come out of the DESI side more than the DLS side. Miscellaneous recurring, for the most part here, is related to premium on bonds, which then gets rolled into the DE1 and is really just a function. It's declining, but it's because of our debt declining. And then the solar, I've separated it here. When we do the tax rate setting, and Sharon has to fill this in for DLS, she puts it between pilot and rentals. And when we finalize all these agreements, we'll have the process that we want in place. Right now, I'm just separating it out so we can all sort of understand where we are with it. We've got delayed on the solar as it relates to Eversource requiring studies of solar systems. Our consultant, Beth Greenblatt, has been working with Rep. Dykema and the DPU and the EEA to make sure that we're moving as quickly as we can. But from a town perspective, we're ready to go. And it's really Eversource, because of the number of projects that have come in the pipeline, including actually the property across the street on Marshall, known as the Bird property, which has been moving ahead. There's been so many solar that it seems Eversource sort of stalled everything else. At the same point, once we get through that process, there's going to be immediate revenue in terms of upfront, and then it's going to be, we're going to ramp up to 450 per year relatively quickly. So I think 150 again is the right number at this stage. And now I see multiple hands and I'm at the bottom, so let me stop there.
Okay, I'm going to try to go in order. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think you sort of answered the question, but if you give me a definitive answer. We have not gotten paid the 150 yet for this fiscal year for solar.
No.
Okay, so can we just make sure that everyone's aware of that, just in case things sort of prolong and we want to, I just think if we haven't gotten paid that money, as we get through into the budget cycle, we may want to consider whether we want to. I don't want to take it out. I
know. So that actually leads me to, I understand what your point is. Let me throw in the opposite point, which is if we get through the last hurdle here with Eversource and we are full steam ahead, which we'd all like to be, it's possible that we would be talking about increasing this number at this stage in the game. I think you're right. If the thing goes sideways on us and we can't undo what Eversource has done, there's a potential that we're talking about removing the 150. On the other end, if everything that we're doing to move this process along moves ahead, it's possible that we're talking about 150 being a very low number for FY23.
Have we had any conversations about targeting this revenue for something specific?
So what we have is
sort of budgeting it in and just kind of letting it leak into whatever we end up budgeting.
So right now, the way that we have it set up is the three sources of revenue, which is the lease, and that's sort of where we're talking about the lease, the pilot, and then the power generation, right? So we've already established that the power generation goes through a revolving fund to support the recycling center and sustainability efforts in town, right? So that has been established through a previous town meeting. So we're talking really about the lease and the pilot plus the upfront fee, which is why I'm less concerned about the current fiscal year, because once the ink is dry, we're going to be okay for FY22 in my opinion. But so at the end of the day, right now the discussion that we had previously and where we are is that lease and pilot would benefit the general fund, which is on the local receipts, and that the power generation would go to the revolving fund.
But this is 20-year money, right?
It is.
Yeah. So it's not, not that 20 years isn't effectively for what we're looking at indefinite, but at the same time, it's not actually indefinite. Anyway, I'm done.
Okay, Michelle?
This is kind of not relative to what you were discussing exactly, but when you said Eversource, I was wondering what was happening with the lights, the street lights.
Yeah, so actually that is essentially in the hands of, I mean, that's going to be a huge component of our budget discussion for FY23. And so, I don't know that it fits in the revenue, but I understand I could have updated under the TA update. So let me do that now. It's essentially in the hands of the lawyers at the moment. I think the way that, and the sort of the numbers that I sent to everybody, the finance committee liaisons and the select board and the attorneys, is it's going to be favorable for us to take possession of the lights themselves and potentially have them converted, hopefully through a grant to pay for the capital costs up front. But until the PNS is ready to go, I don't really have anything that we can do. Our staff, what we're looking at is, again, the grant opportunities. If it is to come to fruition, that we would be prepared to do a conversion to LED. There's a lot that goes into that, including the inventory, but then the inventory is not essentially one for one. We may end up with less light fixtures and those types of things. So a lot of that work would be done by a third party. Rise is the consultant that we use for green communities. Chris Mayo is working with them, as is Matt Zedek and James Keese, which is sort of the foursome that we have on this project from a staff perspective. And right now, Lisa Mead from Mead, Tallerman and Costa is the one who does energy efforts. And so she's been on the solar project at Marshall, and she's on this, and she's working with the Eversource attorneys right now.
So that would be FY23.
Yeah, so we may be having a conversation when this comes out. I think I don't have the answers essentially on the interim. If we were to take possession, so they've essentially told us that they won't change the rate / tariff until the end of the calendar year. I think through the PNS, what I'm hoping for is to essentially hold us harmless between now and the end of the fiscal year. One, on the rate tariff, and then two, on the maintenance, right? So right now we put in to Eversource to say, street light number X on road number Y is out, fix it. Now that list is not getting done very efficiently, but that's the process, right? And so by taking possession of them, we're going to need a maintenance program. And we've looked at a few. Matt Zedek has looked at the Wellesley Municipal Light, who does it for a number of communities. And then there's private sector ones as well. So any of those costs, if they were to come online between now and the end of the fiscal year, we're talking about reserve fund or a line item transfer from elsewhere in the budget. But I just don't have that information to have the conversation. I think we're probably within a month of having that conversation as the select board and the finance committee and staff, but I just don't have the answers yet. If we're going to get some leeway, then it's an FY23 conversation. And if that's not possible through the PNS, then we're going to need to probably cover some kind of overage in this fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so continue. Any other questions on the local revenue? So you want to keep going, Travis?
So that's it on those. I am just looking up for Vin's question. So if there's no other questions, let me just kind of get into that one. Is there anything else on what I went through?
Let me see. So you had a total of let's see, local receipts. You had it 36. What was it? 36 something.
3698.
357. Okay. 698. Okay. Yep. Okay. That and that's
What was it last year, actuals? If you can just drag
well, it's
over.
right next to it, right?
Yeah, but I can't see it. That's
Okay.
FY21 actuals was 4,718,563. So the way that I'm looking at it, because this is generally how I have to prove it out to DLS, is what we're talking about for tax rate setting purposes or for budget purposes for FY23 compared to the 5-year average for the actuals previously is, we're now within $1 million, which is, good. More than that, we get questions, but it's also, any of these numbers I feel are very defensible. I think we're trying to bring them up to the actuals, but we're trying to obviously protect against some of the things that we know could happen in these categories. And like I said, motor vehicle excise coming in under expectation is always your biggest risk, because it's our biggest category, as it is for most towns our size. The rest of these, like I said, there's specific information in here, and reasons why these numbers I feel are appropriate. But they're also, again, it's not, we are looking at the 3 and 5 year averages and looking for any outliers.
What are we trending right now? Or is it too early to tell for motor vehicle excise when you're trying to get a guess of what we're going to do for FY
Motor vehicle
23?
excise is the toughest one to say where we are before. So essentially March is when it's going to come in. Okay. It comes in one fell swoop. And if you hit the number, you're in trouble. If you don't hit the number, you're in trouble, which is why I always, I think the 2.2 is the right number, even though, the 5 year average and the trend is to go higher.
Okay.
Any other questions for Travis on that? Okay, I think that's good information to have, Travis. I think that what I will do is I will take this data and I'll populate our spreadsheet for it. And then I'll see where, and we'll probably as a committee look at that and see where that puts us in terms of planning, and then make sure we align on that going forward. Okay, that was any other questions for Travis on the local receipts estimate? Okay, local revenue estimate. Okay, if not, we can move on to the next thing, which is the schedule, right? Because that's really, just to be clear, right, Travis, what Travis just gave us were a lot of the parameters that he is recommending to us for budget planning purposes. So that's why I said I'll put it into our spreadsheet, see where that gives, looks how that looks in our model, and then we can decide whether we have any feedback to give him on that based on what we find. But for now, that's good. That's what I wanted Travis to present, just tell us where he was. So let's talk about schedule. I know, Travis, you have some comments to make about a proposed schedule. So go ahead and do that. But before you go into the details, I will just make one thing perfectly clear for everybody on the finance committee. I've seen some of what he's going to present, and it doesn't impact what we do. He's proposing a timeline for various stages of the process, but I think that when you first look at it, you're going to think that that's squeezing us, but it's not, and I'll explain that a little afterwards. So go ahead, Travis.
Okay, so I think generally speaking, what I'm trying to do, and this is something that we discussed, and I believe everybody was nodding on all sides of the room at the previous finance committee, town meeting, is to get to the more standard budget process of a 5-level budget that ends with a town meeting approval. And so it's to show sort of 5 levels, which we can track in Munis. And I think, what I'd like to do is to start do that this year. And so to do that, what essentially you end up with those levels is departmental request is level 1, TA recommendation level 2, select board recommendation level 3, finance committee recommendation level 4, and then a level 5 budget is approved by town meeting and becomes essentially the budget that we must live by as a municipal government. Unlike the federal government and the state government, we actually set a budget and stick within it. And so right now, I think we just went through very high level the revenue projections. This is again, by the week of November 15th, it's working off of 2 different things. One, the fall town meeting that we just got through, and then working towards the annual spring town meeting in May, which this year is going to be a little early, May 9th. And so it's kind of setting general parameters based off of those 2 dates and working in between them. So again, you just saw the revenue projections. Like I said, we're gonna set the tax rate for FY22. That's going to determine a certain number of things. And for revenue projections for us, it's really what are we comfortable assuming for state aid at this point in the process, and what are we comfortable assuming for local receipts, because those are really the 2 that are currently in the conversation. The next would be distribution of budget guideline documents. Again, I worked with the finance committee last year, got those out. It was a little bit of an interesting year because of all the sort of uncertainty at the state level. I think there's much less uncertainty this year, and I think we'll be able to get that document out. This would be like a week before, I think in the past. So just a little bit more aggressive. And that would be the week of the last week of November. So then the departmental budget request would be due, includes a preliminary superintendent or level service budget, I believe is what they did last year. It just allows us to plug something in to look at, generally speaking, what the schools are looking at. I think Superintendent Kuska mentioned previously that they're going through a process where they're looking at their long-term strategy. And so obviously that's going to impact it. I think, if we can have a superintendent budget from them, which I've sent to Keith Bidet, that can be plugged in by February 11th. That'll help us for modeling. And then a school committee recommended budget, I think, would fall into the same general timeline that has been in the past, where they present to the finance committee. This year it would be March 22nd, I think, is what I shared. Last year I think it was March 23rd was the original plan. So as the chair mentioned earlier, no real change on that end. So if I were to get all of that information based on this timeline, I would have essentially a couple weeks. I would meet with the groups, look at sort of where we are, and be able to come up with what I feel is a balanced recommended town administrator budget, and then present that to sort of all interested parties in a document that would show column one would be the departmental request compared to the FY22 budget and compared to the actuals for FY21 in previous years, the standard view that we would see. And then it would be a column that essentially is the FY23 departmental request. Then next to it would be the TA recommended budget if it differs from the departmental request. That would get sent. The select board will review the budgets that are under the select board purview. And then, generally speaking, what happens in my municipal experience in other towns is between the TA recommended budget and the select board recommended budget is more likely than disagreements between the town administrator or the select board on sort of recommendations. Generally speaking, is that information changes, things that are assumed at the time of the departmental request or the TA recommendation have changed, and that information is available to the select board. Then they would have their select board recommended budget available on March 15th, which would include all of the budgets under their purview. At which point the finance committee would have a 3-level budget: the departmental request, the TA update, select board update. And then we would look for the finance committee recommended budget by April 12th for the town meeting on May 9th. So I think what the chair was sort of pointing out was that between the time of the TA recommended budget and the select board budget for items that, like the planning board, the board of assessors, school committee, those types of things can still be scheduled by the finance committee as needed.
We lost
library
Travis.
trustees.
Travis, I don't know if you can hear us, but so at least
Yes.
everybody having the same issue. It's just
No,
me.
I can hear him. We can hear him.
Okay, there you go. I don't know. It just came back for me. I don't know.
What happened?
Sorry about that,
Well,
Travis.
I
I just
think-
lost all sound for a minute from.
I thought it was
Zoom.
me.
I think to the chair's point, right, we could probably put a column in here in terms of some things that the finance committee could do outside of this general parameter. But again, this is sort of to allow what I think is going to be beneficial to everybody along the way to see the process unfold and have it on paper, and then have all of that information available to the town meeting. So yeah, I think that's a summary.
Okay, let's go in order. Mr. Murphy, you're first.
Yeah, what do you mean by level 2, 3, 4? I'm confused by that term.
Yeah, I can remove that. I mean, it's honestly the way that the accounting software for municipalities works is you plug these in along the way, and it saves you the finance staff time in the end to have them all plugged in. The departmental requests go in, they go into a level 1 column in Munis. The next column is the TAs, and then again, so it is, until a budget is approved by town meeting, it's essentially, it's all recommendations, and so or requests and recommendations. And so once the level 5 goes into Munis knows at that point, this is the budget that we're tracking to. It's really more of a software term, and I'd be happy to change it, but it's
No,
the
I
way
just
that
wanted
view
to,
it.
that's fine. I just wanted to, I wasn't sure how you were meaning it. It was more detailed or whatever, but that's totally understandable. So I don't care one way or the other if you remove it or what. So thank you.
Okay, Ms. Zimmer.
Just from working with the schools for years, January 14th seems real, or even February 11th seems really early.
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, from last year's process, what I would be comfortable with and what I voiced to the superintendent and the assistant superintendent for finance was, I think that the model that they came out with last year, which was here's a level service budget and here's a superintendent requested budget. Then those numbers essentially got reviewed by the school committee, and then there was a school committee voted budget, which I believe ended up being the superintendent budget. So they presented two different numbers. One was level service, one was with some additions, and they expressed what those were. I think even that level of information is just helpful to the process for us all to see. And then I think, like I said, the school committee vote would probably not change based on the previous timeline, which would put them in front of the finance committee on or about March 22nd, which I think last year, based on the original schedule that the chair and I sent out, was to have them on March 23rd. Obviously, a number of things on the state aid projections from information from the state was delayed last year, but the normal schedule, quote unquote, normal schedule before COVID has been in the March 20 timeline. And so I think that this still works for that, for the school committee to have a discussion with the finance committee around March 22nd.
Okay, and then the March 15th, does that mean we wouldn't get any department budgets that are under the select board until March 15th? Like even the smaller budgets, like I'm thinking like youth and family services or veterans agents, or does that mean we wouldn't get anything until March 15th?
No, I mean, I think again, the value in this process is that a departmental request and a TA recommended budget is available as of February 21st. I had to move all your faces here. Excuse me. TA recommended would be the week of February 21st. So no, I mean, you'd have that level of information, and then you would have the select board recommended as of March 15th, right? So you'd have two columns, and then you'd be adding a third by March 15th. Yes, on those.
Because typically we don't listen to a budget until it's been approved by the governing body.
Yep.
But just keep in mind, Michelle, that this is their recommendation for an entire budget, not individual departments. They'll be reviewing individual departments long before this March 15th date.
So it'll be trickling in like it always does.
Yes, I would expect so, Travis.
I would anticipate that, again, you'll have the level 1 and 2 on this schedule, and then the select board, I don't know if they're going to want to be more aggressive on this timeline than not. But when they get through them, to share that and have a working document of the ones that are approved is certainly fine by me.
Well, let me ask you this question just to be clear on this. That's when they release a budget that they think is what they want, that they believe is what they want, right? That they're saying is what they want. So what to Michelle's point, they have to review as part of that process each individual department they oversee, right?
And now
that review process is going to start pretty early, correct? I mean, the select board is not going to wait till March to start talking about and do a batch approval of every department, are they?
I would say that they need to at least see the TA recommended budget before they're going through and voting on budgets, right? And I think that this is sort of the process. This is looking at it sort of more holistically for them to be able to see it as a total picture before voting on budgets, right? And that's part of the frustration in the past scheduling has been these meetings happen in terms of asking questions, which is great and a healthy part of a budget process, but then no decisions are made until the very end. That what they need to see is this is one way to balance a budget from the town administrator, have that information when they're reviewing the budgets before they can make a critical decision on the budgets that they oversee.
Okay, so but to Michelle's point, and that's fine. I understand that between the process as it always unfolds always involves them reviewing budgets through March. So that's not any different. Okay. The difference, or at least what I'm trying to clarify, which I think is, I agree with Michelle, right? There are a bunch of budgets that they can approve without having a big budget blueprint, right? They can, things like motor vehicle fuels, you can put you're going to have on January 14th, you've got budgets from everybody, right, to do your budget. And included in those are going to be a bunch of your own recommendations on select board departments that are relatively straightforward. Streetlights, motor vehicle fuels, things like, there are others like the benefits we've always done at the end, things like that, right? So my plan, and this is what I told you, right? Since all the department budgets are due on the 23rd, on January 14th, right? At that point, for all departments that are not reporting to the select board, right? We would assume that they've been approved by their oversight boards because they've been sent to you. So we can start reviewing those budgets as soon as mid-January. But then by February 21st, we should have available most, if not all, of the select board departments, because you'll have had to put those together for your budget. And then we will, we may get the last few big ones between February 21st and March 15th. Right. I think that there would be a great amount of trepidation if you're saying to me that we're not going to get anything from the select board till March 15th. That's not going to do for us. So I understand showing a whole budget that says this is the whole budget we want, but there's a bunch of stuff they have to approve. And if you're saying they're just going to wait to approve everything till March 15th, then that is going to be a problem for us timeline wise.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the ones that are the small budgets that we always sort of front load at the beginning. I think all of the entire schedule needs to be pushed back to not have weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of meetings in which no votes are taken and sort of we don't revisit it until months after initial conversations. So I'll state that, right? And part of the reason to do this is to stop that, to truncate at least as much as possible. In terms of, do all votes that are essentially require a select board vote before finance committee, do they need to wait until March 15th? No, I don't think that that's true. I think that's what we discussed. But at the same point, like I said, the way that they should be, and this is some of the criticism, quite frankly, that the finance committee has levied in the past is, the select board is not making decisions, not prioritizing those types of things. Part of the process of this process is to give them more information from the TA recommended budget to essentially say, look, this is how the TA did this. It requires cutting X, Y, and Z to meet the requests of these departments. Maybe they disagree with the way that I would do that and they come up with something else. Now that is also a benefit, again, to the finance committee to see, here's how the TA came up with recommending to balance this budget, and here's how the select board would do it. And now you have that information, as does the town meeting, which then sees those number of levels of budget. To your point on can we get a head start on some of the smaller budgets like fuel and the sustainability coordinator and those types of things? Yeah, I don't see a scheduling issue with those types of things, but to allow this process to play out so that the select board has that information, I think is, again, in our best interest. That is the purpose of doing it this way.
So, okay, well, I'll let everybody else ask questions, but
And then I assume that we will be getting the budgets at the same time as you do. We don't have to wait to see your approved budgets, right? We see the
No.
budget requests.
No, it'll be, the departmental requests will be open to everybody. TA will be open to everybody, select board, and then the finance committee. We'll track them all we'll track them all as we go.
Okay.
So in theory, we have access to every budget on January 14th. They just may not all be approved at that point.
Okay.
Correct.
I just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing with the level one budget is that it doesn't balance anything, right? It's just a list of requests that most likely, unless something crazy happens, are greater than the revenue that we have to support them.
That's our responsibility, is to present a balanced budget to town meeting. So.
Yep. And in this process, I'll be doing the same, and the select board, and then all three of those will be available for information purposes. And I can't imagine that we all come to the same conclusion. Plus, as I mentioned before, information is changing over this time period that we all have to, and I think, as is all towns, by having the finance committee essentially have the last review date on this before the town meeting, is that you're also going to have the most up-to-date information. It's just the reality of the scheduling of a level 5 budget.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan, you're next.
Yeah, so just two parts. So just sort of to because I don't want to prolong this too long. I mean, it would be helpful whether we don't want to really review approved budgets, but if the select board is looking at these and we can start to sort of also look at them, well, they're going to be small budgets that are not going to have any questions. One reason not to push this off until later is, and it changes between years, is we invariably will have questions, more work will have to be done, things will come up. I mean, just look at what we did last year with all the positions and the work that you ended up doing, right? But based on some of the sort of questions that we had, we want to make sure that you have time to do that based upon thoughts that we have and things that come up. So I guess maybe we need to be a little bit more flexible about whether we review unapproved budgets or we start talking, having those conversations about unapproved budgets earlier. I know we could do the liaisons, but I also think there's a benefit to the entire committee seeing a lot of this stuff once it's sort of getting closer to where they're at least reviewing it. So that's just going to be my point there. My bigger question, though, I guess, is your plan is to present a balanced budget yourself, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't want to belabor this and get into a whole theological or philosophical discussion about it. But there is one budget that the select board does not have control over. You don't have control over. It happens to be the biggest budget in the town. And so if the schools came in, and I don't want to get to how they get to this, but it's a plus $3 million budget that, again, we're talking hypotheticals, but I mean, their early budget requests have historically been quite large. Now, Dr. Cuska is new, and so maybe there'll be differences. How would you handle that? Because traditionally that's been sort of the role that the finance committee has done, but a $3 million budget presumably basically sucks up every other penny that we have of incremental revenue over the prior year, and then some, really, right? Like, so it's not really a balanceable budget at that level.
Yep. It's a pretty common thing that we go through in municipal government. And so, like I said, I was comfortable last year with the model that they put out, which was two versions. One was superintendent budget, one was a level service. You essentially can model off of both. And then there's always a possibility that the school committee is going to come in and vote something potentially even higher than either of those two, all of which you have to be prepared to handle. I think there's a variety of ways. One is to balance off of that number, which, if the number is greater than the increase in revenue, then the conversation right there is you're talking about an override, and the school committee has to be prepared to speak to that. And then if it's not, and it is, as you said, essentially using every available dollar, then the answer is to increase with to maintain level service, which was the way that we, the finance committee, the select board, town administrator looked at last year's budget, which is a level service budget is not a 0% budget. Our fixed costs go up. And if you would like to keep a 0% budget on everywhere else except the school budget, then there are places where you're going to need to cut to maintain level service in certain areas. So that's essentially what ends up happening. And I think that the community, and then at that point, has a discussion to have on what would be required if we were to build that into the model. So I mean, again, but I understand the question, and I just and I get it a lot. And I guess the answer to the question is every town does that, does this model that I have up on the screen. And so I don't think that by this town using it, we are somehow not going to be able to reach a balanced budget.
Oh no, I don't think that we won't be able to reach a balanced budget, but I'm sort of trying to get at who suggests the cuts and sort of how those, because I don't think that from what I'm hearing you saying, basically you put in the school's sort of superintendent budget, and if we can, assuming we can pay for it with increased revenue, everything else kind of gets reduced, at least initially, to balance the budget. And I just don't think that there are other interested parties in town who are going to be okay with that, even if it's where they're just sort of the starting point of the discussions.
No, I think, again, regardless of this budget cycle progression or the history of Holliston, the questions need to be asked of the school committee. As I said previously, where that falls on this is the school committee presenting most likely on the same timeline as always to the finance committee. My point on where it falls in with the TA recommended budget is that the information available in February in the middle of February is going to be different than in the middle of March. And so, yeah, it's going to be a lot of if this, then that, and that's okay. That's part of a budget process. It's not concerning to me. I understand it might be new to Holliston. But yeah, I mean, and then at the same point, just as all budgets, right? And even if the answer is we can fund every request that came in, which is an unlikely and unattainable scenario, the answer still is that we all have a responsibility, from finance staff to select board to finance committee, to look critically at the requests that came in to determine if we want to use taxpayer dollars to fund any of them. So yes, the school committee still has to answer for their budget requests, as does the superintendent, as does, sort of each step of their process. The same thing on the town side. And yes, if the school committee request is extremely high and the town's interest is to fund that, then there is going to be repercussions on the town side of the budget, which means that I will need to balance that.
But I'm talking about your sort of recommended budget level. So this is for example, so the schools are huge, but they can be paid for, but but there's no other penny for anybody else, right? Nothing, right? So just every penny, that's the dollar amount. But we were doing this study for the fire department, and it comes back and says, we need to sort of, bring on, basically spend an extra $200,000 to get the ambulance to sort of where we need to be staffing wise, and the model. I don't want to get, the details don't matter, right? I mean, what would be in your what is it, the level 2 spreadsheet? Would the 200,000 for the ambulance budget be in there? I don't know how you, like, you said you present a balanced budget, and I'm not sure how you reflect the sort of the needs, desires, wants of all the departments in there without sort of.
I don't know that I can say it again, but let me just take out the fire example because I don't like that one.
Okay.
Because we're because we're not going to have that information in time, not because it's not it's a valid example, right? So, but let's use the example that you've been partaking in as liaison, right? Let's say everybody in that group decides that the best thing to do in the FY23 budget process is to request an additional 2 FTE, as an example. I don't know what the recommendation is going to be of that group or anybody. That is going to be a request that comes and hits multiple budgets, including potentially the school budget. That is one thing that if the school committee, or excuse me, if the superintendent recommended budget were to take up every available dollar of increased revenue in FY23, then the departmental request, which would include that, is either going to have a TA recommendation that removes it because it can't fit in the bottom line, or a TA recommended budget is going to have to essentially show what needs to come out of X, Y, and Z budgets, which is not just the school committee, it's every budget, to make sure that these things can fit. And that's part of why there's narrative. That's part of why there are org charts and all these different things that we've not been seeing really on a consistent basis across all these budgets, that we then have as part of a comprehensive budget that looks at the entire thing to say, here are, if this, then that. You can't do it unless you're looking at the whole picture, right? And so again, I understand what you're saying, right? If I just plug in the superintendent request, then that probably means I'm going to have to show that the TA is recommending all of these things come out of the other budget. Now, again, every community goes through this, and that's not how the end result is, but I understand it's new to Holliston. So I get the question, and I can only tell you that over time, this is going to prove itself out.
Okay, I get that everyone does it, and I mean, and I get that it'll work. I'm just trying to, so basically the TA recommended budget is a living document that, that it, even if it's zeros, it's not necessarily that what's the number in the departmental TA recommendation is not necessarily the actual number you're specifically recommending, because it's going to come with a narrative to explain the entire situation. So it's not just the TA recommended budget is not so much just the numbers, but it's all the context that you put with it. Is that sort of what
it is? Right. It is context that goes with it. But to your point, it is also at some point when it's finalized is on a spreadsheet that says at this point in time, this was the TA recommended budget. That's why, like I said, as you go through the budget process, new information present itself. Let's say the superintendent budget is changed by the school committee process before it's voted as a final recommendation. That information then might be available to the select board. That information may then be available to the finance committee for a final recommended budget for the.
I don't want to take more time with this. I'm still a little confused, but we can work through it and we'll figure it out. And I'll just, in Travis we trust.
I have no doubt we will work through it.
Okay, Jay,
Muted,
Jay.
still muted.
Thank you. Thank you. So this looks pretty straightforward to me. So what I'm thinking is on January 14th, you're getting like, there'll be a lot of budgets that are pretty like predictable. Like, I think that's what Michelle was driving at, that you'll look at it and say like, okay, we're good. And you on the 14th want to know for some of the departments that are relatively consistent, you want to make sure there's no surprises. That's what the 14th snapshot is really going to look like. And then the school budget, which is the biggest piece, is going to come in pretty much at a small percentage higher to maintain level service as the previous fiscal year. So
Okay, I'll stop you right there. That is not a
Yep,
true
go
statement. Okay, that is not a true statement. It typically comes out at more than a small percentage higher to maintain level service.
the school budget. Okay.
Yes,
All right. So take the school budget out of it. Like when you look at, we have a lot of small departments that are relatively predictable. And that's what like you'd want to look at it on the 14th, just to make sure that there's no surprises out of your typically predictable budgets. Did I get that right?
Yeah, so let me say it this way, and I think this might be the bridge of what Michelle and Ken are trying to say on those ones. Like
Yep.
I am, for the most part, generating the solid waste budget. And I'm using, we're pouring into the contract and the actuals out of Harvey's and those types of things. And I'm using Matt Zedek quite a bit, who's been very helpful. But for the most part, I'm generating that. So the departmental request on that, on some of these other ones, is really coming from myself with, input from the select board along the way. But it's really, they're coming from staff based on sort of what we need to do to meet those needs. And we may have that information well in advance. And so I think to Michelle and Ken's point, those don't need to wait until they go through this entire process before the finance committee can sort of ask the questions on them. And yeah, something might change by the time the select board votes on it in this particular sort of layout. But there's certainly conversations that could be had in a number of different areas of the budget that don't need to wait for all of these dates as I've laid them out.
Yeah. So, okay. So you can kind of get a jump on some of the quasi predictable stuff. The superintendent recommended budget is where we may get our first like material, like, oh, we need to look into this. We need to dive into this more. But the first like totally aggregated baseline budget is the level 2 budget, the way you've described it, where you'll see the whole genealogy of every department's ask. And then you saying like, this is what the number is, and then doing some kind of like flux reporting saying like, okay, Department A asked for 100, the TA recommendation is 80, and then like a general description of where the delta comes from. Did I get that right so far?
Yeah, I think the only
Okay.
thing I would say is sort of missing from that, I think we discussed a little bit earlier, is that in the department, some of the departmental requests will come from a body that is overseen by another board or
Yep.
committee, right? So
Mhm.
library trustees, planning board, board of assessors, for example, right? They're not huge budgets in some instances, but they are
Right.
overseen and discussed by another body who is essentially has a department head, but then is overseeing the request. So
Yep.
I think the sort of the difference in this process is that I may, in balancing a budget, to Dan's point, recommend something that may not be what a board or committee asked for. It may not come up. I don't know. And I think that that's really the only sort of difference to the point where you are going chronologically here from the past.
Right, but you're gonna explain, like, if the library said I need $100 and you say you get 80, there'd be some kind of explanation on the delta.
Yeah.
Right? Okay,
Yes.
that seems pretty straightforward. And then the next thing is, okay, so you say here's a balanced budget with all the assumptions. We would look at what was the initial ask, what was the TA's recommendation, what's the delta with an explanation. And And then the next thing was like when the select board level 3 comes in, they may layer in, like, let me ask you this, between level 2 and level 3, how many differences am I gonna see? Like, aren't you gonna be working with the select board most of the way? So in level 2, you're getting like the 80-20 rule, you're getting at least 80% of what the select board would be putting in their recommended budget is in yours.
Yeah, so my experience, again, in past towns is really
Right.
between the level 2 and the level 3 budget is really more that new information has become available either from, quotes that a department has on the expense side, or changing revenue figures that we did not know in the beginning of a process. I don't like when those happen, but last year, I think we all remember, and we were doing it for the finance committee, myself, we're doing it purposely, which was every time that the state would give us new projections on revenue, we would consider it and update it, right? And that's annoying to do through the process, but some of those things can happen, right? And so it's really, in my experience, is going to be very few and far between where it's the TA recommends cutting a position to balance this budget, and we would recommend not doing that, but cutting over here instead. So, but those do come up, and then again, the value to the finance committee in that instance is, here's a department request, here's a TA, how the TA would do it. Select board disagrees with them. Finance committee has all of that information when they make a recommendation.
But also keep in mind that in the library example, well, Travis can recommend a lower budget. It's still the library, because it's an independent board, will still present us their request, and that will be what we sort of take as the official request.
Yeah, and any department can still, you can ask them why their departmental request was what it was, and you can ask me why I would recommend anything different. I mean, that's, again, the value of all of that information.
Right, but just to be clear, and this is, I think, the point that Michelle and I were on, right? Part of the finance committee's job is to meet with these departments and gather the information ourselves, and to use that in addition to your input, in addition to the select board's input, to make our recommendations. So while a schedule like this is fine, it also has to accommodate us not having to meet with 41 different, people, or go through 41 different budgets in 3 weeks, which is why I said it's when that FY23 department requests are due. What we need to do is make sure that for departments outside the purview of the select board, those are voted on by then, or they have a plan to be voted on shortly thereafter, right? And we have to make sure that the select board is, dealing with some of the easier budgets. Again, unless we decide we're not going to take approved budgets, that's fine too, I guess. But we have to have access to you and to the, as the select board's rep, and to the departments to do our job. We don't sit on our hands. My point is, we don't sit on our hands till March 15th and then start doing our job. It takes much more effort than that.
We have to start as soon as the budgets are available. We have to
Exactly.
start doing them.
And the town wouldn't want us to do that, because a lot of times we generate questions that then sort of help the process, but take time to sort of figure out either the answers to or the solutions to issues that we see, which a lot of times, just like we did last year, save the town money while providing greater services.
So how do we, so we're gonna get, Travis, we're gonna get as much of the information you have on the 14th, correct?
Everybody will have the departmental request.
Okay, so there's no issue. The next thing is, so we have a budget.
Jay, don't say things like there's no issue. Okay, you've heard this say this 3 times. The requests have to be official. Okay, that's the issue. Is we don't consider the Board of Health budget that Scott Moles puts together. He's the health agent. He's not the oversight board. The Board of Health has to vote a recommendation. The issue we're talking about is that if the select board is not going to vote on or approve any of their budgets until March 15th, that takes a whole bunch of budgets that we'd ordinarily review prior to that out of our purview, unless we decide we're going to go through a different path and say, okay, Travis is we're going to deal with unofficial budgets or whatever. That's the question, right? The request to the finance committee is not official until the oversight board has said, yes, we agree with this request from our department.
I get you. I think you missed one of my questions, which is that the level 2 budget, when I was asking Travis, what is the difference between the level 2 and the level 3? What I heard him say is that it's typically revenue adjustments or things that are coming in late, not requests, but more, you're getting more information to fine tune the budget. So to me, what I'm thinking is you're getting at least 80% of the snapshot of what the select board's thinking by the 21st of February, right? That's so you get all the information that's voted on by the 14th of January. So
Well, no, it's only voted on by the non-select board departments, hopefully by the 14th of January.
Okay,
That's the issue.
so
That's the
non-select
issue.
board by the 14th. So there's a lot of small, you're looking at volume and smaller dollar amounts. And
No,
then you have to
not at
wait.
all. Not at all. The select board controls about, the schools are about, a huge chunk of the budget, like 50 something
55%.
percent. Okay, rough percentages. The select board oversees about 27 to 28% of the budget. So those two departments alone, those two groups see the vast majority of the money. So in that 28% or whatever it is, there are a bunch of small, non-controversial things. But remember, the select board oversees police, fire, ambulance, and other things like that, treasurer collector, all these other budgets that are not very trivial. So the issue from
DPW.
our perspective is just, if we're going to, as a matter of process, say, okay, we're going to base it off the TA's, what we're saying is that in the process of getting to March 15th for the select board, they have to go through all those budgets themselves, or the TA with the TA's, Travis's recommendation, whatever. Ordinarily, what would happen is, as they looked at them, they'd say, yes, we support this request. We'll take a vote. This is our official request for this department. Then it goes to us and we can review it with Travis as the official request. If they're going to wait till March 15th and say, we're not going to vote anything, and then we're going to just vote this big budget, right, all at once and approve all the requests at once, then that makes it difficult for us, because that means that all during our process, we're considering budgets that we don't know whether the select board is going to want them or not. The police could come to us and give us a budget that the select board then later changes. So we wasted our time.
I do think what Travis is trying to do is helpful to give the select board an overall view of the overall
Yes.
budget, but there's got to be an in-between where they can see that overall, but then start at least, if not officially voting to approve, saying, yeah, this is basically what we're going to, we're not going to vote on it now just in case things change, but at least letting us know that this is essentially, there's got to be some in between, so we can start reviewing, asking questions, giving feedback, talking about things, so that there's ample time to, please keep in mind, and not that I want to go to the governance committee's schedule or their work at all, because they were, it was awful, but they had the budget being moved over to the finance committee by 80 days before town meeting. This schedule is for 55 days. So, even they recognize that more time was needed by the finance committee to sort of do the work. And I think that, issues that have been raised by Mr. Sparrow in the past that we're making decisions at the last minute, that people don't have time to sort of come and argue their case, if you will, through some, and this the way it feels is could actually exacerbate that issue.
Okay. Well, anyway, before we get on, Jay, do you have any more questions, or you want to?
I'm done.
Okay. Michelle?
I'm not muted, am I?
No, you're
No.
good.
I just wanted to explain to Jay that, like, when we get a budget, like, let's say fire or police, we don't just look at the bottom line. We review each line, and we very frequently have questions for the police chief or the fire chief concerning those lines, and we get presentations. So it's not just looking at the dollar amount, but we look at what is involved in that dollar amount, how they built the budget. And that's what is time consuming.
I'm familiar with budgeting, and I'm pretty sure you guys follow the same process that I'm used to. So I'm
So
right there with you.
there are times when we ask a question and the answer isn't always given. It's, we'll have to get back to you.
Yeah.
So we need time. And that's the issue, is why that's troublesome of getting, the thought of getting all those budgets so late.
Okay. Ben?
Thanks. Yeah, 2 points just to make about this thing. Well, actually 3 points. The first is that this is, this process is, we have to think about it as happening concurrently with the finance committee process. Your process can happen in the interim. And, to the point about, there's certainly a number of boards and committees that do not fall under the select board that you'd be able to review. I have, my other points are, one of my concerns in general is that I want to make sure that whatever we do for a process from my board's perspective is that we're not trying to do the same work multiple times because we're trying to meet different kinds of frameworks and deadlines. But that being said, what I think would be helpful is, basically what's happening and what's happened in the past is we basically do this piecemeal, you review it as, other boards and committees review it. And what I would ask the finance committee to do, if they'd be willing, is to just set a timeline and say, hey, could you just give us your budgets by this date or something to that effect? You're saying, like, just approve them in some respect.
that every
and then
year.
that sort of puts the pressure on us to do those kinds of things. And then just say, you know what, we want the budget by this. And then we can say, okay, or, we can have a back and forth here. The sort of the doing it over time sort of puts it in a position where there is no structure there. And so it's sort of like, like what would work for you? Just tell us, like, if we said, if you say that if the select board approves all their budgets by February 21st, the date of the presentation of a TA budget, is that reasonable? Do you want it before then? Do you want it, you're saying the 15th is too late. Well, what works? Tell me, like, give us a sort of an idea, and then we can work within that structure.
I think the way that Ken and I had sort of discussed it too is, right, we can set up a process to the side of this, which is, these are the ones that we can tick off week by week, the ones that, and I think that I'm not, that I understand the concern, and this is an oversimplified schedule version to sort of get in place people to understand the level 1 through 5. But certainly we can look at it on a week by week basis, and I think that will answer a number of these questions.
Yeah, and that's, and to your point, Ben, that's what I plan on doing. That's what I told Travis when he showed me this. I said, I'm gonna have to go back and look at our schedule and figure out what we need by when. And and I just wanted to, that's why I started this whole discussion by saying, don't look at this as though we don't get anything till the 15th. So I just want to make, that's why I keep emphasizing that, right? Because we will not have enough time to do our job.
I think that answers the question that's being asked, is like, you want an official budget, just tell us, all right, well, this is what we want to do. We would like to review the police on this date. And we say,
okay, I'll be happy to do that. I will work with Travis.
I don't have any problem with doing something like that. I don't think my board would have any issues with doing that.
If I could just add one thing in response to Ben, though, I understand that no one would likes to have to touch budgets more than once, but that sort of is the budget process, is that we do have to review these things multiple times, because as things change, we try to figure out what we can do. We
do want to minimize that on all fronts.
We want to minimize it.
I'm also thinking about, like, I got department heads who have to make the same presentation multiple times, and I want to try to mitigate that as much as possible. That's all I'm trying to say. I understand that there's extenuating factors, there's other information, things come in, but I want to try to minimize that whenever and however possible through the process. And if outside forces come in, fine, but I don't want the process to create more work for people. That's all I'm saying.
Well, that's what we try to do that every year. So not create more work. I'm saying we try to minimize the work every year for everybody. So especially us. Now okay, Jay.
Yeah. So to that point, like where I was trying to go is, if we're getting some information early and we have questions, is there any kind of way that, like, how do we know we're not asking the same question that Travis or the select board's asking? And that's where I'm wondering, is there any kind of way we could have like a central, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the quick answer is, for boards outside of the select board's purview, there's not much you can do about that, in the sense that, I guess it depends. I mean, obviously each of our boards uses what's available, right? So if we review a budget before the select board does, and I mean, remember, okay, let me make this correct statement. Select board doesn't need to review any budgets outside of their control, technically. Okay, they can if they want to, but we, as the finance committee, as the creators of the budget that gets recommended to town meeting, have to do all the select board budgets plus all the other budgets. So typically, absent this process, in a given year, the select board wouldn't even meet with the library and stuff like this, because those budgets are not under their control. The library trustees would meet. Library trustees would come to us and present their budget request. Okay. this whole idea of the select board putting together a budget, TA putting together a budget, TA has always done that, prior to Jeff, we've always had TA do it. But what the TA would do was be at our meetings where we were reviewing the budget with them. So like the library would come to us and we'd be sitting there asking questions, and Paul LeBeau would be sitting at the back of the room, and he would raise his hand and ask any questions he had. So they weren't doing a separate presentation to the select board because that's not required. Okay. And I would expect that would be the way Travis would do it. And that has been how we last year, when we were reviewing budgets, Travis was on all our Zoom meetings and was free to answer any questions. For the most part, he's the guy doing the budget, as you saw he's presenting a TA budget, right? So that's why I said, so it's not any questions that we have. Typically, he will hear them, he will get the answers because the answers will be forwarded to everybody. So that process ensures that basically the select board through the town administrator gets all the information that all the questions and concerns we have.
So the short of it is we won't duplicate questions for anything that's not under the select board purview, because Travis is gonna be with us whenever we're asking those groups questions.
Correct. And
Okay.
for the ones under the select board purview, right, obviously in the same way that, let's say, the Board of Health, right, they have their staff prepares what they think is the budget they want. The Board of Health considers that budget, asks all those questions, gets their answers first, and then says, okay, we've answered, we're voting to forward this budget to the finance committee. Then they come present to us. So the way that questions are avoided in that case is that's the whole reason why we wait for official budgets, right? It's so that the oversight board can deal with the issues on their budgets before they come to us, right? And that's why we were talking about this whole conversation is focused around the select board owned budgets, because in a typical year, the select board would review those budgets on their own, ask all the questions, agree that, to say, okay, this is what we agree to recommend to the finance committee. Then they would come to us. And if we had questions, of course, they would go to the select board and the department head, right? And again, because Travis is sitting there during our reviews with those. So the feedback always, every time we raise issues on any budget, Travis is always there. So, the feedback to the select board always occurs through the town administrator by being present at our meeting. But that's the process we're talking about, is for those select board budgets, is making sure that we don't want to get a budget that the select board then changes. Like, we don't want to hear from the police chief and then have the select board review it a week later and say, no, we disagree with this, we're changing it entirely, because then we reviewed a budget that wasn't official, wasn't coming from the oversight board, right? So to Ben's point, I think we can work this out. I don't want to belabor this point. I think we can work out a schedule. But what it has been in the past is we would construct a schedule that basically Travis and I would do it, and Jeff and I would do it beforehand, where I would say, here are the finance committee meetings I'm anticipating for the budget cycle. And I'd say, on this day, I want to review these 3 budgets from the select board. So Jeff would schedule the review with the select board the day before. So they'd review a budget on Monday, then we'd get it on Tuesday, and to your point about preventing redundancy, what would happen is whoever owned that budget would have 1 week where they presented to both groups, and then any questions that came out, you'd go follow up later from that. So it made it easy. That's not codified in this, what we have now. We can do something similar, and that's what I was saying to Ben before. I have to work on that with Travis to say, okay, we can figure out how we're going to do that to align to this new schedule. But that's the concern, right? This doesn't address any of that. This is a higher level schedule with kind of like milestones, but along the way, we have to be getting material. And as Ben pointed out, they're willing to do that. They just have to know what material that we want from them. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, okay, any other questions on the timeline? So I guess, Travis, you and I will sit down and we'll start talking about scheduling and figure out if we can chunk it up a little bit so we can
Yeah,
put a
I
little
think
granularity in there.
that first item, when it comes to the board packet, is really the things that I want to look different this year is making sure, and I've put together most of it for department heads so that they don't have to, but I'd like departments, whether they're overseen by a board or committee, to have org charts, a little bit more consistency across. We ended up, as a group, the finance committee, select board, myself, looking at org charts of probably 5 or 6 areas last year because of some of the things that we went through. But there's no reason that we shouldn't have all sort of pretty standard information for each budget request, which includes, an org chart, an
Yes.
FTE count, anything like that. And so I think other than that, the budget packet will be relatively similar. I think we just went through, the revenue picture is much less complicated than last year. And so, yeah, I think as long as we just kind of go through those weeks outside of this high level view of schedule, I think we're in good shape.
Okay, so yeah, and as I said, I think that what after this, what I'd recommend is when you have like the document you propose sending out to the departments, you come to us and we can talk about it, make sure that, because of course, we want to make sure that in addition to the information you want, that we're making sure the departments are producing the information we want as well. So, which is usually the same thing, but we just want to, need to confirm that. So. Okay, any other questions for Travis on the timeline? Oh, go ahead, Michelle. You're muted, Michelle.
When are we supposed to be contacting our liaison in the timeline?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So to the chair, I think that I still need one liaison for Youth and Family Services. Otherwise, I think we're good.
Oh, okay. Well, I might have that for you soon. I know who it's going to be, but I have some other changes that might be afoot. So, okay. Okay, so we're done on the timeline. Okay, last thing is I need liaison updates.
Okay, so
Do you have anything? Go ahead, Michelle.
okay, I sent an email to everyone. I don't know if everyone got that. I sent
Yes, you sent out this morning. Yep, I got it.
It was a letter to the editor that Scott Moles co-authored. I just wanted, it's not relevant right now because they're asking for the boards of health across the state are asking for state legislation piloting using ARPA money. But I just thought it was interesting and I wanted to make sure everyone saw it. And I also included a link to Framingham Board of Health Nursing that I'm intimately involved in since I was in Framingham for 9 years. And also Neshoba, which was always a model for the whole state. I used to be, in another life, I was on the executive board for the Mass Association of Health Boards. So I tend to know what was going on across the state with boards of health. And that was, it's amazing what 16 little towns were able to do by pulling their resources together. And I think that's the model that they want to use and have the legislation to have things more regionalized. So I wanted to share that and show you what they're trying to do statewide. They're not asked, I talked to Scott last week, they're not asking for any increase in budget because they're hoping to do things with state funds and ARPA. And also the contact tracing is now being done locally, but they're asking for ARPA money, or they're going to be asking for ARPA money to do that. So they're not asking for any money right now from us.
Okay. Any other liaison updates or questions for Michelle? Okay, well, if I hear no other updates, that brings us to the end of our agenda for this evening. So if anybody, what I will say, just one final thing before we go, because I did have this about the calendar. So upcoming meeting schedule. I'll work with Travis to determine when we have to, when we're going to need meeting. There's nothing that I have right now other than getting the prep ready for FY23. And we all know this from experience. This tends to be, our calm before the storm, so to speak, when we're putting together the budget template and things like that, and the guideline documents and all that. So obviously right now I would say, I don't see anything for next week, but if that changes based on my conversations with Travis, I'll post this for next week. I'd say with fairly high certainty, we will not be meeting the week of Thanksgiving, because I think that I don't see anything urgent that would require us to meet that week that couldn't be taken care of the following Tuesday. So for planning purposes, you can all assume we have the week off the week of Thanksgiving. So, okay. Other than that, I'll keep everybody posted as I work out the details with Travis on the upcoming meeting schedule. Unless anybody has special topics they want to consider, in which case just let me know and I will post as appropriate. So, but I guess we're done for now, so I'll entertain the motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, it's not subject to debate, so we'll proceed immediately to a vote. Mr. Whitaker,
Yes.
Mr. Alfred,
Yes.
Ms. Zemer,
Yes,
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
and I vote yes. That concludes the Tuesday, November 9th meeting of the Finance Committee. Thank you for joining us this evening. As you just heard, our next meeting has not yet been scheduled, so keep an eye on the town's website for our next posting. But for tonight, we're done. So thank you and good night.